To the House. Kia ora.
I call the Honourable Member Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a great pleasure to take a call on the holidays for recognition of Waitangi Day and Anzac Day Amendment Bill. This is a very important bill. I want to acknowledge the work of Dr David Clark, my colleague, who picked up this bill from Grant Robertson and also from Darian Fenton. I want to add, because as we know, success has many fathers and failure is an orphan, although of course when I say success has many fathers, I might say in light of the debate yet to come that success has many parents. And for those who have just tuned in their radios and their TVs, when I say success has many parents, I'm talking in relation to the Mondayisation bill. I'm not promoting polygamy, I'm just saying that as a saying, success has many parents and failure is an orphan. My contribution to the Mondayisation bill, which we are debating now, is that Grant Robertson had a conversation with me as he was drafting it, and so I feel that even my poor prince sit over this very important piece of legislation. And well, I'm not saying he talked to me exclusively about it, but I feel as if even discussed the bill with me even before I arrived here. Now, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories about the old Labor Party and being driven by the unions, because that certainly wasn't the case. But in response to my colleague Mike Sabin's arguments about the old Labor Party versus the new, I want to say about the old National Party when it comes to labour rights. It was the old National Party that actually introduced the first personal grievance law in this House in 1970. That was a National Party that respected workers and workers' organisations. That was a National Party that actually wanted workers to have a good relationship with their employer, be respected and have fair processes. What a sea change we have in the National Party of today, and perhaps I'll come back to that when I have a moment. I want to say this also to Mike Sabin, is that this bill is not about not observing Anzac Day and Waitangi Day on the days they fall. Of course we will continue to do that. These are important days. These are the days, and indeed the events that sit behind them, that define us as a nation. And we will always observe them, and we will observe them with great emotion and with great consideration and great compassion to those who have gone before us for the contribution they've made in the case of each of them. But what this does do, and at least in relation to those years in which the days fall on a weekend day, actually observing the following Monday as a holiday enhances our observation of them, the commemoration or the celebration of those particular days. This bill, Mr Speaker, fulfils the promise of the Holidays Act, which is to grant 11 days public holiday to every worker every year. And that is an important thing and an important achievement. It fulfils the promise of a modern and civilised society and an economy that recognises the contribution of working people, but recognises important events in our history and allows us as a community to commemorate them and celebrate them as appropriate. Let's not forget that in the last around about 15 years, there has been a 25% increase in productivity and value in this country, whereas real wages have increased barely 10% over the same period of time. There is no loss to business, not in any aggregate sense at least anyway. There is no loss to business. In the 2 years out of 7 that this bill will allow extra days to be granted to workers in observation and commemoration of these very important days. As David Clenton said in his contribution, we are a nation that over the last 20 years has shown that we are working longer hours on average and not being paid commensurate for those additional hours. We are not getting the reward. This might be seen, for those who see some economic difficulty in it, as providing just some little extra reward for those extra hours worked and the extra productivity produced in our economy as a whole. The truth is that this bill has widespread support across New Zealand, not only amongst working people, but across many businesses, not the least of which is the Tourism Industry Association, representing literally hundreds of businesses, big and small, in this economy, and a very important role to play. In fact, the tourism industry is so important that this government is about to grant an additional $158 million over 4 years to it. That's how important this government sees the tourism industry. Quite why it doesn't listen to them on issues like this, I don't understand, although I can explain it when I go back to the issues about the modern National Party and their attitude to workers and workers' rights. Responsible regulation in the labour market simply means ensuring fairness. And this bill is an example of responsible regulation, and it is a bill that will ensure greater fairness for working people. This bill adds that. This bill, what it does, all it does, is adds a maximum of 2 days leave in 2 out of every 7 years. 2 out of every 7 years. This is not going to break the Bank of New Zealand productivity or the Bank of New Zealand business. It is a fair recognition of something that actually our Holidays Act already promises but doesn't so far deliver. This allows, or this will continue genuine observance of these important commemorative days when they would otherwise fall on a weekend. You know, when we think about Anzac Day, let's talk about Anzac Day because we are on the eve of Anzac Day week. When we think about Anzac Day, we know that young New Zealanders, predominantly, in fact it was all men, conscripted into the army to go and fight thousands of miles away. And that is important to us because actually one of the driving forces for the founding of the Labour Party was an opposition to conscription. But young men conscripted to fight in a war many thousands of miles away, who accepted the argument that this was for Queen and country, it was for a lifestyle, it was for a sense of freedom. It was not to work longer hours. It was not to lift their productivity by 25% and get nothing for it. That's not what young soldiers fought in World War I for. They fought for a set of values and for greater freedom. And this bill properly and truly recognises the sacrifice that was made because it represents greater freedom. The freedom to spend time with one's family, the freedom to express oneself how one wishes in their own time. That's what this bill does, and we should respect it and support it for that reason. It is about putting work in balance with the rest of one's life. That is the challenge of life in the modern world, and this bill will help us to achieve that. And it is about good rights at work. When we think about Waitangi Day, and we think about the historical origins of that day, and about rights to citizenship, this bill is about conferring not only citizenship but humanship, if you like, about the humanity of each of us, the right to have time off to mark important historical events, to commemorate it within our communities, to celebrate it where that is required. When we think about kawanatanga and tino rangatiratanga, working longer hours, being deprived of the right to observe those important days, that is not what the Treaty of Waitangi stands for. It stands for people being people. And that, if anything, what the Treaty of Waitangi is about people. And when we think about, this bill is very important. This bill is very important because it's a chance for us to express our nationhood and those two important days in a real day by the world of commerce stopping for a moment, taking a step back in years in which they would otherwise not do that on these two important days so that we can all observe it. When I started this contribution by talking about the new National Party, look at everything they've done when it comes to work rights. Every time this government comes to turn its attention to work rights, it is about taking away. It's about detracting from workers and their rights, whether it's 90 days, whether it's changing the test on personal grievances, a piece of law that actually originated from a progressive Liberal National Party, which we don't have today. We don't have anymore. When we think about access rights at work, when we think about the right for workers to have a say over when they take their holidays, every time this government turns its attention to work rights, it takes something away off workers. Well, thank goodness for the Labour Party. Thank goodness for the Labour Party and that at least an opposition with good members like Grant Robertson and Dr David Clark and Darian Fenton. We have the ability to introduce laws like this and get them passed for the good of all New Zealand, and that's why we are supporting this bill.
I call the honourable member to Iraroa.